Hey everyone, I am Dan Kaplan, senior reporter at SC Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to today's live webcast titled Content Aware Security Information and Event Management Defined, sponsored by Nitro Security. In today's IT environments, visibility is paramount. For some time, security, information, and event management, or SIEM, solutions have helped organizations see into the contents of their applications, documents, and protocols. But with a proliferating user base, growing number of applications, growing threats, increasing compliance demands, effective SIEM now necessitates the ability to not just collect, but also correlate log, context, and content data to make informed decisions. To discuss today, we are pleased to have two gentlemen join us. First, you'll hear from Anton Chuvakin, who is the principal of Security Warrior Consulting, and next will be Eric Knapp, who is the VP of Technology Marketing at Nitro Security. Afterward, we'll have some time for questions and answers, so keep those inquiries coming in as we move along, and we will be sure to get to those at the end. Without further ado, let's welcome in Anton. Anton, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Hello, everybody. Let's talk about content-aware SIEM today. So, our presentation today will cover the following points. I will start from some background on security information and event management, because despite multiple years in development and in somewhat active use, as we know, the first SIEM products appeared back in the late 90s or maybe even mid-90s, the technology still confuses a large number of people today. So it makes sense to go through some of the basics. I will then explain some of the points about current typical use for security information and event management today. Apart from that, I will go and focus on what information today's security information and event management systems consume. In other words, what SIEM is. Afterwards, I'll make some comparisons between legacy SIEM, or traditional SIEM, as we can call it, and content-aware SIEM that adds some new dimensions to the whole SIEM story. Now, the interesting bit here is that due to historical reasons, the name Security Information and Event Management still is used alongside with Security Information Management or Security Event Management separately. Now, some people would sometimes incorrectly name it Security Incident Management, which is really not the same. So SIEM with I&E is the overall name for that type of a technology. So here's my own informal view on SIEM evolution. As some of you know, I've been involved in this space since 2002, working with SIEM and log management products at vendors and different other capabilities. So initially, when SIEM technology appeared from the early vendors, the main focus was, as we all know, reducing the IDS false positives, as well as correlating IDS and firewall data. Back in the day, as you remember, we had all those network worms and scanning activities and all this other stuff from the network security. So SIEM products came up to pretty much compensate for deficiencies in intrusion detection technology, which overwhelmed people with alarms. And by using some other types of data alongside IDS data, people were able to, well, with varying degrees of success, to manage that problem. Now, as skeptics would say, SIEM technology started to become less interesting for a while, and then the compliance mandates such as PCI DSS, Sarbanes-Oxley, and many others came up and somewhat changed the whole thinking and focus behind the SIEM products. There's much more attention started to be paid on not just looking at network security devices or network devices, but also at server data, as well as other things, where we had to look at what the users are doing, what people are doing with sensitive data. This is where SIEM technology was pretty heavily reoriented from being the enabler for the Security Operations Center, which, as we know, isn't really there for most companies, but focused on analyzing the data from servers, systems, again, still the network devices, in order to satisfy the compliance mandates, as well as related monitoring requirements, auditing requirements. This is also the time when standalone log management solutions appeared to solve some different problem of broad use log collection, but we wouldn't talk about that today. Now, next, as we started to solve even more problems. And in the current day and age, which I guess we can call it cybercrime age because of the proliferation of all this financially driven hacking, we sometimes have to look at all the previous problems from the past, both the network security problems, which are only partially mitigated, compliance problems, monitoring servers, monitoring other things, but also become more application aware. For example, as you know, a malicious document and malicious PDF are the very well-known attack vehicles in the companies. And those things happen inside documents, inside the content. So security information and event management tools will have to become aware not only of IDS data, not only of firewall data, not only of server data, but also of application data as well as what happens over the wire, what kind of information is being transmitted. So this is the brief story. Now, notice one important point about this. None of the previous problems that SIEM focused on hasn't been truly solved. IDSs today still produce false positives. In fact, web application firewalls and DLP tools and other things add their own false positives to the mix. So we are sort of having this ever-increasing stack of problems, and SIEM is trying to evolve to solve them. So what kind of functionality you can try you'll find in a security information and event management tool today? Now, some of this is pretty much a grand total of things present in most products. Certainly, SIEM tools such as Nitro as well as others have their own secret sauce to add to this. But this is the core functionality that you should expect to see in most every SIEM tool, whether commercial or even open source. First, SIEM tool has to consume log data, what actually happens on firewalls, networks, and other devices. Typically, SIEM would also grab some context data, which I would explain a bit later. Information is typically normalized. This is kind of a long word, which means many different types of logs will be converted to the same format, or at least they would look somewhat similar inside the product. Now, many people equate correlation, the next feature of SIEM, with SIEM itself. Gartner folks would put this under the SAM functionality or event management functionality. The issue with SAM or with correlation is that that's the way to analyze the real-time event flows to make decisions, make conclusions automatically. Now, there's a lot of information on correlation. I wouldn't make a joke that most of it is written by myself because many other people have done it as well. But you can look up the details on how correlation technology inside SIEM functions on the vendor websites and in many other places. Now, this correlation technology enables actual notification, alerting, or sometimes even live action or making configuration changes and other things. Now, certainly, the idea that a SIEM would automatically change something in the network, despite the overall coolness, has never become popular. It might eventually when the tools improve, but this isn't really the case today. Now, on the other hand, when SIEM analyzes the data, it can prioritize what's more important over what's less important. And that's a much more useful, in my view, way of using the SIEM. You don't use it as a system to manage your security. You use it to actually highlight what's important. And when you think about all the real-time operation of a SIEM product, think about it would highlight, or it should highlight, the stuff that's important for you in all the other noise. And this is probably the main value you get out of SIEM. Now, certainly analyzing historical data using reports, delivering those reports using Scheduler or using a web portal is important as well because it allows you to give sort of a bigger picture, not just instantly what happened and why it's important, but also the overall summaries of stuff. Now, since the tools, the first letter in SIEM, security, implies the use for primarily security and compliance purposes, most products have a particular workflow that you follow when you discover issues, when you receive those alarms, when you follow them, when you investigate them. Now, detailed discussion of the workflow certainly goes beyond the scope of today's webcast, but this is what you'd find in most SIEM products. At the very least, you'd be able to click on a correlation rule or click on a notification and start adding more data, start writing notes and doing things like creating an incident case, if there is indeed an incident. So this functionality, again, the best way to understand and to learn more about this functionality is to go read the vendor websites, go read some of the materials from the analysts, and go read some writing on Google and in other places. There's a lot of stuff written for pretty much the last 10 years on this. Now, let's switch to a more interesting subject, namely, how is SIM used? Now, this initially was a blog post I wrote on this, but it later became a much more detailed analysis of scenarios. So let me go through some of them, and folks in the audience can figure out whether your ideas for how you plan to use a SIM actually fit that view. Or maybe you have a completely different use for your SIM tool. In this case, the first and the primary SIM use case was the Security Operations Center. This is where you imagine those people watching the screens, chasing alerts. Analysts are watching the stuff 24/7. This is the original classic use for SIM. This is why most of the SIM products were invented for back in the 90s. I remember when I worked for my first SIM employer, we had many customers who built Security Operations Center with our tool at the center. Now, it later turned out that only the largest companies and government agencies worldwide would be able to build a full-service Security Operations Center. And this is how the next use case, which I call a mini SOC, or informally the morning after SOC, where people don't really have analysts on shift. What they have is they have people tasked with reviewing security issues. Maybe every morning they go log in, they run a report, or they run some kind of a delayed view, and then they analyze and drill down the issues. Those people might also carry some devices to get notifications over SMS or other functionality, where they would then log into the console and perform the analysis. Now, even smaller companies sometimes cannot even afford that. They cannot afford to have people reviewing activities and logs every day. So this is what I call quote-unquote, and quotes here are important, automated SOC, where people deploy a SIM, they configure correlation rules, they configure alerts, maybe they schedule some reports, and they don't really perform any monitoring beyond what the product would tell you. Now, this is certainly a very popular use for SIM among the smaller companies. I have to mention that not all products function well in that environment. Some require you to be logged in and review alerts. It wouldn't function that well in this way. But this is still quite common across companies who cannot afford people, analysts sitting there 24/7, or even checking for stuff every day. Now, as I mentioned in my quick history overview, some of the SIM products are used for compliance purposes, or at least were purchased for compliance purposes. I call this the Compliance Plus model, when you get your budget using PCI Sledgehammer or SOX Crowbar or the Citizen Machine Gun, and then you get your SIM implemented, and then you start using it for many other things. So in this case, you probably schedule reports to run across the historical data and review them weekly, monthly, or in other periodic intervals. Now, personally, if I were building my own world of SIM, I would want those people who use SIM products like that to eventually graduate to using them in one of the other three ways for security, and not just to make the PCI assessors happy or to make any other auditors or compliance people happy. So this is kind of like might become your intro use, which allow you to graduate to either doing the periodic monitoring or doing the real-time monitoring in a SOC. Now, from this conceptual views and from this sort of a way to analyze SIM technology and SIM market, let's switch to what information actually enables SIM to function. When we say security information and event management, what are those events? What's that information? Now, the main type of data that you feed into your SIM is certainly log files, from PIC syslog to checkpoint data to Windows event logs to Unix syslog to Oracle transaction table, Oracle audit tables, to many, many other things. So I'm going to cover some of the ideas for what those logs are and how bad the situation really is with log diversity. Now, the second type of information which enables you to analyze logs is context. What happens around that activity that's recorded in a log? So context is the second type of data. And the third type of data, which starts to appear in SIM products, again, Nitro Security comes to mind, not surprisingly, is that SIM becomes aware of some other type of information crossing the network. So I'll get to that in a few minutes. Now, as some of you know, I spent almost 10 years looking at logs and various capabilities. And one thing that always puzzles people about logs is that all of them are different. Now, in this case, I have 4 login messages. Now, notice that something as simple as having people connect to a system and log in cannot be expressed in a single clear way. In case of a Juniper firewall, it would be user logged on. In case of a Cisco, it would be login success. In case of Unix, it would be accepted password, and Windows would have its own way of saying that a user has connected to an account. Now, this is here just for illustration. In reality, there are maybe 50 other ways to express something as simple as a login, or even as connection allowed across a firewall. So this type of stuff cannot really be analyzed unless it's normalized and brought into a single format inside the SIM product. Because you really want to see what the user, Anton, did across the systems. You don't necessarily have the luxury of going to a Unix system, checking it there, going to a Windows system, checking it there, going to an Oracle system, and ad infinitum. So what's missing here, though? We've seen a couple of IP addresses, we've seen usernames, we've seen ports. Who would tell us what those machines are, what those assets are, what those things actually do? And this is what brings us to context. Check out this picture of a log file from a Unix machine. It has some IP, it has some service name, username, and other things. And what's shown in those balloons is the context, which is really useful for analyzing the log data. Now, if you want to look up some additional information on this, check out one of my blog posts called On Log Context, which explains not only that picture, but also what types of information are useful to understand in logs. Now, one thing is, this happened on a particular date. So we want to know what happened, what else happened at the same time. What happened on the same machine? What is this port number? What is this service number? Who is this user? Well, in this case, that's a generic username root, but in some cases, we want to map the username to real name, to business unit, to roles, to privileges, and to a whole bunch of other things. Now, notice that none of these are in logs. So you have to go grab them from other systems or manually enter them. And this is the concept of a context that shows up in logs. And all SIM products would have a degree of context information present inside them. Now, the most obvious and the first to be utilized is certainly vulnerability scan data, because for every asset or for every machine, obviously from the ones you actually own, you want to know what the vulnerabilities are. In fact, one of the early algorithms that we designed back in my first employer was to correlate IDS alerts and IPS alerts with vulnerability data in order to analyze and understand whether those really matter. All this classic stuff that you can see in almost every white paper on SIM would talk to you about how seeing IIS attacks against Apache wouldn't matter. Certainly the world of log context is much bigger than that, but that's a very simple example. Now let's move to something newer and interesting, namely content. In a recent white paper that we wrote together with Nitro Security, we actually used the analogy of a book. If you know who the book author is, you know the ISBN number, you know a bunch of other information about the book, as well as the title, you can make a certain conclusion about what happened and what the book is about, whether it's worth reading. Now, certainly, title, author name will give you some information. I mean, if you trust the author to write a good book, maybe this whole book thing can happen because of my recent book on PCI, people have some idea. But to really know what was going on, you have to read the book, or at least read the abstract. So this explains the difference between metadata or log data or context data. Like for an author name, you can go and see what this guy wrote in the past or what else happened, or was he involved in any other interesting activities. But to know what the book is about, you have to read it. So SIM knows all the metadata, all the logs, all activities, and all the context, but can it read the book? Can it see what the email that was just logged is about? What was the context of that IAM chat we saw? Again, back in the day when we would track IRC botnets, we would certainly know that there is an IRC connection established from your company to an IRC server in Romania, which was a significant security event, as you can guess. but at the same time, without knowing what they're chatting about, we cannot really go and track the attackers, see what they're planning, that type of stuff. So the examples here are range from email contents to even email document contents for all the data leakage cases, to other information. Now, none of this is present inside a SIM traditionally. It can be extracted from other systems, but it's just not present in a SIM. Well, until recently. Now, let me take a step back, or rather to the side, and respond to one question that people sometimes have in this situation. They say, well, our SIM can consume packet contents. It can consume network traffic, and then that's pretty much what you're talking about, right? Well, it's not exactly the same, because if you can drill down to packet content upon seeing an IDS alert, you basically would see the attack and you'd see some other additional details, which are obviously quite important. But at the same time, if somebody emails a document, seeing the content of a bunch of packets is not the same as opening the Word document on your computer. You can extract some of the information from just, if you read hex, from packet content, so you can turn them to ASCII and read them, obviously. But it's not the same as looking at a document, looking at an IRC chat, looking at other things. Or if you have video and audio content, certainly looking at the packet, just as packet headers and packet contents wouldn't tell you what the video is about. So this is what I'm talking about here. I wasn't talking about just being able to drill down to network packets, as some of the SIMs do with obvious performance implications. This is about actually understanding the application traffic and understanding the files being transferred, whether it's by FTP, email, or other mechanisms. So this is what content is about. Let me also quickly go and explain some of the differences between traditional SIM. Again, sometimes people think that the term legacy carries a negative connotation. By legacy here, I just mean traditional SIM that existed for the last almost 10 years. So collect and analyze logs, collect and correlate contact information, very typical features of a SIM product. Now, what we are doing here is we are also adding additional information, adding a new type of information that can be very useful to have in a SIM. Now, Eric would explain that not every SIM can actually handle that information, not just because they don't have analytic mechanisms, but because they weren't engineered to consume massive amounts of, say, audio, video, or other types of information, like even document contents. So what it enables us to do, what a content-aware SIM can do, is to use the contact info not just for investigative purposes, but also correlate logs with content and with context. Namely, here's an email log. It says that Jay Smith, sorry for picking on Jay Smiths in the audience, has sent an email to somebody else. Now we have the log data. We have user information on Jay Smith, an example of a context data. And we also have the document that was emailed, which is content. Now, which would allow you to make a better security decision? Just knowing that Jay Smith emailed to his friend in Romania a document which was 1 megabyte in size, or to know that he sent a particular document and seeing his document out there. So this, again, this functionality is sometimes present in other products like DLP, but in this case we are mostly using content for investigative and analytic purposes. We might not look as deep inside the context as DLP products do, but we'd still know what was going on. And this is probably the best explanation for what's new about the subject of a content-aware SIM. New type of information shows up, it's analyzed, and it's correlated with existing information inside the SIM, logs and context. Now, those of you who have seen me present on a similar subject know that I sometimes mention something that I call a secret to SIM magic. And I'm going to reveal that secret to you in a second. Apart from all the discussions about context, logs, and content, many people approach SIM as many other IT security or IT software purchases. They buy an appliance or they deploy software, and then they think they're done. Now, certainly, SIM products being somewhat complex, and SIM products also need to be integrated with many other systems. There is this concept of a deployment services, and all vendors offer that, and they can have engineers show up on site with the boxes, rack them in, connect them to the network, configure some logs going in, and do that. So at which point you converted your box that can consume logs, context, and content in some cases into something that's running. Notice that I say running as opposed to operating. The real value of a SIEM product, whether a legacy SIEM product or a content-aware SIEM, is in operationalizing it, figuring out how that SIEM would deliver value. As some of you know, I am doing consulting in that area, specializing on SIEM and log management, and in particular, I see lots of people who bought SIEM products or bought log management products and deployed them. So they solved the first two boxes, but they never really operationalized their SIEM or log management tools. And this is where many things become more tricky. So how do you use that content in your investigative procedures? What logs do you send in a SIEM to achieve that security monitoring purpose? All this happens at a different stage, which many, many people, in fact, I wouldn't lie if I say that the vast majority of people think of SIEM as the first two boxes and not as the first two boxes and the third one, where you actually make SIEM part of your operation. And that's why, honestly, there are plenty of failed SIEM deployments out there, and in earlier years there were more than there are now, because more people understand that to use advanced SIEM technology today, you have to tie it to your operations and figure out how you'd use it. I wrote this recent blog post called, "I want to buy correlation." You really shouldn't want to buy correlation. You can use correlation if you have problems that can be solved with it, but just buying it wouldn't give you the access to that SIEM magic. And with that out of the way, I'd like to offer some conclusions. One is that SIEM is certainly evolving. Some of the market analysts who don't look deep inside this technology somehow think sometimes that SIEM is stagnant. That's absolutely not true. SIEM is evolving. SIEM products are better integrated with log management tools. They can see more data. They can perform more analytics. And they now can also consume content. The second conclusion is that no, not every SIEM can do that because logs might be voluminous. I personally have seen people that pushing the limits of the terabyte sizes, and I personally have not seen a deployment of a log management tool where sizes go to petabytes, but I certainly have heard rumors that such sites exist. So such volume of data coming into SIEM is huge, and being able to handle that volume as well as the volume of content just doesn't call for every technology. You have to be engineered for a way to handle that data. And with that out of the way, I'd like to